Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about the healer changes that they've proposed for the Midnight expansion, and also relating it to our last video on healing that we made a month ago, talking about how healing needed to change. The three main factors I talked about in that video: the raid cooldown sort of spam, where you would just layer multiple raid cooldowns on top of each other to deal with damage. The bloat was definitely with how many different modifiers and trackers and things that you need to juggle between to actually make your spells do real healing, and the lack of like priority and single target healing. So I'm very pleased to see this blue post by Blizzard, because they talk about that stuff from the very beginning. They say they know that in the War Within, healing is generally very fast-paced, and healing spells can rapidly shift your raid from a severely damaged state to nearly full health in a matter of seconds. It is stressful to react to rapidly changing health bars, and is very intimidating for newer healers what they should be doing at any moment. Healers have a large variety of high-power cooldowns that they can rotate through to handle basically every major damage event that they encounter. So in Midnight, we have made some changes with a goal of slowing down the rate at which you can heal up a party or raid member from a severely injured state. We want healing to require less pre-planning of knowing which cooldown to use at which precise moment. We want there to be less ramp up of complicated ability sequences to get effective output for your healing spells. And then they start digging into the changes. There was some confusion I've seen from people talking about the pre-planning side, and what they really mean by this is that you had such a wealth of cooldowns as a healer in the War Within that every single time a mechanic comes out, you would just say, oh, this mechanic comes out, I use this cooldown. This next mechanic comes out, I use this cooldown. Oh, I actually spooged my cooldowns, used them incorrectly. Well, my sustained healing, my healing outside of cooldowns, is so weak that I can't keep everybody alive, so we just die. And so it makes, even like M+ healing like a spreadsheet type of counter, where you say, oh, well, like, oh, I don't have this cooldown for this ability, well, we die. And making it so that more so in the past, in previous expansions, where your sustained healing was high, you just had to execute your priority really well to do that high HPS, making that more of a priority rather than, I have a cooldown, I can't help but win instead. So what they've been doing is they've been making some major changes, which also align with our previous video. Talent choice nodes. They're now making a variety of major healing cooldowns compete with other major healing cooldowns. For Preservation Evoker, Stasis and Dreamflight are on the same node. Uppies and Barrier are on the same node. Holy Prism and Divine Toll are on the same node. Ascendance and Healing Tide, that's a huge one, are on the same node as well. And some abilities outright get removed, like Symbol of Hope. Now, what this big pruning is on the one hand, I will tell you, it's unequal. I think having Healing Tide competing with Ascendance, but then Holy Priest keeps Divine Hymn and Apotheosis separate, is very, very strange. Same thing, I think, as well for like Tranquility / Convoke / Tree of Life. Seems really strange that there's like an empowered form that people get the option to have, and also a raid cooldown at the exact same time. So I don't think it's 100% equal, at least at the moment, but it also is going to mean that if Shaman, for example, doesn't have their Healing Tide totem, then they need to have really, really high sustained output outside of their Ascendance to make up for those kind of things. Or Ascendance needs to hit like a frickin' truck just to make it worthwhile. That being said, I think this is an overall like good change for the game, because it makes it less about just like mapping out how you want to use your cooldowns. And I think it makes it, alongside a lot of the other talent changes that they made, where they're sort of baking in a lot of like passive effects. This makes it so that you are constantly doing real healing and reliable healing out of your spells. You don't need to just like have, resonant words, for example, which is after you cast a holy word, your heal or your Prayer of Healing hits 40% harder. You don't really have to have that ability to use Prayer of Healing anymore, or something along those lines. Your base healing spells just get brought up and they just naturally do good healing as a result. Those, I think, are some of the really big benefits out of healing going into Midnight. And I think that's sort of like their goal that they have. And that goes into their mindset with the short cooldowns, where they say iconic buttons like Prayer of Mending, Wild Growth, Healing Stream Totem still exist and should still be potent on their own. Several modifiers have been adjusted, baked in, or removed. Prayer of Mending, as an example, was one that had so many different modifiers, and still kind of does, that are increasing its output, making you cast it more frequently, and proccing other additional effects. So they had things like Answered Prayers, which procs your Apotheosis off of Prayer of Mending bounces, just flat out removed, so that you don't have to worry about when you're timing all of your proc effects or when you're predicting when you're getting your Apotheosis. You can start planning around it. And so from the health bar's yo-yoing perspective, less cooldowns means that they're able to have more sort of like deadly damage that can still challenge you. And when you have less cooldowns, your pie chart or your pie of various healing contributors, where do you get your healing from, is also meaning that more of your like chain heal, heal wave, flash heal for Holy Priest are also going to be larger pieces of the pie now, because you're going to have less healing effects that are coming from just random sources, or less healing that's dedicated only into your cooldown windows. And a lot of the write-ups for healers going into this expansion have talked about just that. You know, Paladins, for example, had their write-up saying, we want to remove a lot of this like fluff healing that's kind of coming from nowhere and everywhere, because that doesn't feel satisfying for your spenders. It doesn't feel satisfying for your Holy Shock. What is satisfying is learning a new skill before WoW takes up all your time when midnight drops. And that's why our sponsor for today's video, Boot.dev, is here to help. They teach you from start to finish how to code in Python, Go, SQL, and a whole bunch more programming languages, with their platform built like an RPG game, giving you challenges, quests, achievements, and all kinds of tracking as you're on your learning journey. Whether you're looking to brush up on some new skills or change your career entirely, they have a variety of courses which you can test and experiment and demo with without even paying a dime to see what you're getting into. And if you get into a membership, it unlocks all of the interactive features, getting you writing a ton of code from the very beginning, helping you learn by doing, just like within WoW, and making sure that you have all the guidance you need to have a steady course of progression throughout your learning journey. They know that a career in development is not some get-rich-quick scheme, and so they focus on teaching you those fundamentals from the very beginning and helping you have a well-rounded understanding to absolutely smash technical interviews and get tons of real projects constructed while you're learning. There's never been a better time to check out Boot.dev. Use our code AutomaticJak to save 25% off the annual plan. Huge love to Boot.dev, and let's continue. Now, I know some people will see the time to react part, where Blizzard says, we want to shift your focus away from rotating through several high power cooldowns to selecting the right spells for the right situations. I've seen a few people posting on social media about it already, about how this could be like a big negative for them, and I really disagree. There's two main factors that I disagree with. One, with less healing cooldowns in the game, then Blizzard's going to make damage, hopefully, less crazy spiky, and less dependent on, oh, do you have cooldowns? Or, hey, this ability comes out, you're expected to have healing cooldowns here in order to deal with it. And then the other side of it is that, you know, there's some cooldowns in the game where, you know, maybe it's Ascendance and you just mash chain heals or something and you can't help but transfer all the healing to the right people. Or maybe it's like Convoke and you're just casting all of these spells while you're sort of channeling it. The big thing that I'm interested in is that with less healing cooldowns in the game, you are more focused on actually playing a cleaner rotation. And so there will be a lot of areas where a skilled player can shine because they're executing their priority system in a lot better of a fashion than a noob. There's still going to be some pre-planning and value as you go into higher keys, because yeah, as a shaman, you might only have Ascendance, but you're summoning ancestors with your healing stream totems. So when you actually cast those totems matters a huge amount. It matters just as much as how you cast your Cloudburst today, if not more. We'll have to see as it goes into it. So I think there's still a number of different ways that they're able to make the game really skillful and really challenging. And when it comes to the burst damage, one side of the coin is how many healing cooldowns are available. The other side of the coin is something we've talked about a ton on this channel, and it's the amount of defensives that you have access to. Now, this has been really uneven from what I've seen so far in the alpha changes, but it seems like there's a decent amount of defensive pruning going on in the game so far. I will say it's unequal and unfair from what I've seen. Warlock, correct me if I'm wrong, still has incredibly insane amounts of defensives, but like Monk no longer has diffuse magic, which reduced your magic damage taken. Now it just buffs your Fort Brew and it has that spell reflect effect just tied into your Fort Brew. And that's, it's not nothing, but I mean, Fort Brew is a pretty bad defensive already. And having the spell reflect is, very, very small compared to having diffuse magic the way it used to be. Shaman loses Stone Bulwark Totem. And now Stone Bulwark wasn't an amazing cooldown or anything, but it, losing the ability is still going to be very noticeable. Meanwhile, like Priest, they still keep Fade damage reduction, Desperate Prayer, and they have Protective Light, where you get 10% from damage reduction. Like, I wouldn't be upset at all if they removed Protective Light, but then baked in some kind of passive defensive or something like that, as long as we're at a semi-equal level in terms of our defensive value. So it's unequal at the moment, but if they continue with pruning defensives, which I think that they should, even if it means that they're going to give us like more stamina, or this class takes a little less magic, this class takes a little bit less fizz, I think that would be the preferred area, because when you have lots of active defensive buttons, that's my problem, is pushing the button to have the defensive. That makes it really hard for Blizzard to tune damage, because they might expect players to, use their defensives 80% effectively or something like that. But you healers will know there's a very big difference between a shaman hitting Astral Shift before damage happens and hitting Astral Shift at 10% life after they've taken all the damage. It's hugely different in terms of how their health bars go. And the more they reduce the active defensives that players have on hand, I think the smoother the damage is going to be as a result. They did remove things like Greater Invis's damage reduction for Mage. They removed Mass Barrier, which I'm really surprised by as well. I mentioned earlier, Symbol of Hope getting removed entirely just means there's going to be less sort of raid calls for, hey, everybody, hit all your defensives together at the same time, and then we'll do it again, 30 seconds later. That definitely helps going forward, and it definitely makes it a lot easier to make sure that there's less bursty damage that's going to be coming out as well. Now, with all the glazing that I did earlier, I still do have some concerns going into the new expansion. They've talked about with the hero talent and new talent point adjustments that they do not want any of the hero talent nodes to enhance utility or defensiveness, which is a good thing. But they are also adding Apex talents into the mix. And one of my biggest concerns is having the Apex talents turning into another round of like proc effects to track. We've seen it already with some of the things like Benediction for Holy Priest, where your Prayer of Mendings are sort of randomly buffing up your flash heals. That we'll see. I've already seen a lot of like passive healing effects baked into Holy Priest, for example, where you have like 4 or 5 different new modifiers for Cosmic Ripple, where you just immediately explode for like random healing. And those things subtract away from the pie that is buffing up your flash heals or your Prayer of Healing or your Holy Words in the process. So I'm kind of worried about there still being a lot of like passive effects that are increasing your healing and not being tied specifically to you press this button, you push up that specific person or multiple targets' health bars in the process. I do think there still is some more bloat, and I think that's sort of inevitable with them constantly adding new talents and new abilities and to sort of keep things fresh. I am a little concerned about where mana is going to be, but we won't really know how that's going to look until we get the chance to play it a lot. But the problem that I always end up seeing is that in beta, by the time that we get to test raids or the time we get to test M+, they have like a 2 or 3 week window to properly make tuning adjustments. And they usually focus more on, is everybody doing enough healing compared to each other, versus how does this spec feel with mana? How does that spec feel with mana? Especially when it comes into dungeon content, because that doesn't seem like it gets as much attention for tuning as raid content does. So really kind of concerned about that. And I've been doing like my Resto Druid adventures on stream, and I'm just like amazed at how insanely efficient my mana is as Druid compared to, Holy Priest, or even in some cases like playing as like Shaman. There's so many times where I feel like I'm just burning mana considerably faster than playing something like Resto Druid on live. I'd also say they can definitely go farther when it comes to some of the pruning and some of the adjustments with defensives. I think especially when it comes to the defensives that other specs are bringing to the table, like the Zephyrs, the AMZs, rallies, all those things coming in. I think lenience as well for Disc Priest could definitely be like removed in its entirety. They're still kind of focused on having Aura Mastery stay where it is. I Would love it if like Aura Mastery felt strong, but like Devo Aura didn't exist, but they absolutely love those like little bits of damage reduction that sort of add up. But all those things make for really swingy behavior as to, do you have this thing? Do you not have this thing? And when you stack all these things on top of each other, if you keep removing blocks, you know, it's going to be really, really noticeable when you don't have this spec or this cooldown in your raid group, and damage is going to feel way burstier, way worse as a result. And my final concern is just based off of raids and M+ together. One of the biggest things is that, yes, Mythic Plus is infinitely scaling content, so it's always going to get into one-shot territory eventually, but it's a spectrum. It's definitely a wide spectrum. When you had like plus 30 keystones before the keystone squish, it took a lot longer to get to that level where people were starting to get wombo comboed and just one banged out of nowhere. When it comes to a whole expansion, there's a lot of power that Blizzard likes to add through tier sets, trinkets, all that great stuff, which feels really satisfying when you get them. But in order for them to also make damage not insanely bursty the way it is in Manaforge Omega right now, they need to have enough runway space, basically. What they did in Battle for Azeroth is you would gain additional stamina and power as you were increasing in your neck levels. But basically, you would gain more power. And what I mean by power is you would push up health bars faster as you got more gear and more upgrades with your borrowed power, faster than you'd get stamina. They'd both be going up, but you would see the player power rise at a faster rate than your stamina would. The benefit of rising them both together, though, was that it didn't get out of whack too quickly or anything. And as a result, it still felt like healing could be really satisfying throughout all of raid progression, because you could still have rot encounters. You could still have lots of ticking damage. And Ny'alotha was extraordinarily well known for the ticking damage on a ton of different encounters, especially on things like N'Zoth. So what my biggest concern is, do they have enough runway to make sure that they can keep on increasing stamina while still increasing player power over time and making that feel satisfying? One of the areas that would absolutely help is if they, probably the biggest thing that I've been preaching for years, is adding some kind of buff to healing in 5-mans. That way, the starting point is that you heal a little bit faster in 5-mans, so it's a little bit more reliable to push up health bars quickly. And then you're a little bit slower in raids where you have, 4 or 5 healers to help you in the process of healing up health bars. And then as they sort of rise together throughout the expansion, you still feel comfortable healing solo while not pushing up health bars and yo-yoing them crazy fast in a raid, because everybody can top off quickly thanks to 5-man tuning. In a lot of BFA, they did not have good 5-man tuning. There was only a couple specs that actually could like heal high-end content, and it wasn't until deep into the Ny'alotha, Corruption, all the Essences season where multiple different healers felt really satisfying to play in dungeons because the power scaled up so quickly. That's still a concern. I still think that like the way that they've adopted Atonement and increasing its healing in 5-player content and then making it scale lower when it comes to raid content, they've changed it around going into the Midnight expansion, but they're still keeping that general core concept. I think that's a great thing that they should be baking into every healer spec in the game, and I think it would improve a lot of the gameplay as well. But overall, they kind of covered a lot of the bases I had in my video last month, and you can go check it out if you want to, just to see what my thoughts were before these changes were made. I'm really satisfied with the direction that they're going. I think it's inevitable that like a huge company is gonna like move at kind of glacial speed as they're heading in the right direction, but I think it's certainly trending better than Dragonflight and better than the War Within from what we've seen so far. But of course, I'm gonna have some updates when I actually get a chance to play it as well. So thank you so much for watching. Big love to boot.dev for sponsoring this video. Big love to our patrons for making all this content possible, and I'll catch you guys next time.